This is the first part of the last episode number 6 in our course. In this one, I'll be covering the sampling section in the render settings, so let's get started. I already went ahead and made my scene setup. It's fairly simple, just a backdrop object with some sphere, cylinder, and cubes, with a camera and two lights. One is a spotlight and the other one is the Arnold sky. And now let's open our IBR window. Let's head to Arnold and then open the IBR window. Let's put it to the right of the viewport, right around here. Let's make it a bit bigger. And to start, let's open our render setting by pressing Ctrl B. So under Arnold's, under the main tab, you will find the sampling section, and that's what we're going to discuss today. I reduced all of these 6 values to have one on each category, and to put it in simple terms so that it won't get so complicated, all the sampling section is controlling the quality of the final output of your render. So each value of these controls an aspect of the image. Arnold breaks them into 5 categories and then adds the multiplier over all of them, and this is the camera AA samples. And as the name suggests, the diffuse controls the diffuse, specular the same, transmission, and the rest. But for each of these values, you will find a direct and indirect layer that can be controlled either from the light itself or from this menu, and this is what we're going to discuss right now. Let's close our render setting window and reveal our first null, which is the diffuse one. As you can see in the IBR window, we have the display here on the beauty, and we have the inactive AOVs. I want you to think of the AOVs term as the layers that, if we put together, will give us the final image. So the whole image to get rendered, it took 1 second, and this is when we have one in each value of the values that we had in the render settings before. And since we're going to discuss the diffuse, head to display and then press on inactive and then choose diffuse direct. Let's zoom in a bit. You can see how noisy the render is, but if we press again on Arnold Spotlight and under the samples, you'll find that we have only one sample. I want you to imagine that the samples are the mathematical calculations that Arnold's do to render our image. So whenever we increase them, we increase these calculations so we get a better image. And to show the effect, let's increase the samples value. Instead of 1, let's use 20. After we increase the samples to 20, the render took 19 seconds, and we're only rendering this AOV, the diffuse direct. The last time we were rendering the beauty and it took about 1 second, but the image quality is much better, as you can see. We got rid of the noise that we had here before and in the shadows. And now again from the IBR window, head to display, and instead of the diffuse direct, let's use the diffuse indirect. Took 20 seconds to render, but it's so noisy, as you can see. So to fix this kind of noise, we will have to open our render settings again by hitting Ctrl B and increasing this value here, the diffuse value. Let's use a value of 7 instead of 1, and I'll wait till it's fully rendered to show you the result. It took 24 seconds to render this AOV, but we don't even need to compare between this one and the last one since the difference is obvious. To sum up the diffuse direct AOV is controlled by the samples in the lights that you have in your scene, but the diffuse indirect AOV is controlled by the value of the diffuse in the render settings. Let's move on to the specular. we get a black sphere like this since we are in the diffuse indirect. Instead of the diffuse indirect, let's go to inactive and then choose specular direct. This specular direct AOV quality is also controlled by the samples value in our lights. We already had it at 20. Let's decrease it to 1. We already noticed the difference. This one almost took quarter second, but when we had the 20 samples, it took around 4 seconds, and the quality is much better. Now let's choose the specular indirect AOV from inactive, choose specular indirect. 4 seconds to render, but it's a bit noisy. Let's hit Ctrl B and increase the specular value. Instead of 1, let's use 7. It took 5 seconds to render, and as you can see, it's much cleaner and we got rid of all the noise that we had here. Now let's move on to the transmission. I already have my glass material ready and applied to the sphere. The glass material has a specular aspect to it, but we're not interested in this. We're interested in the transmission itself. So from the IBR under inactive, let's choose transmission direct. Since the glasses are transparent, so we will not have anything in this AOV. Let's head to the indirect transmission, indirect AOV. It took almost 1 second and it's noisy. Let's hit Ctrl B and increase the transmission under the sampling. Instead of 1, let's use a value of 7. And let it render. I took a snapshot of the first render and the second one, so I'll show them to you. This is the first one. It took 1 second and it's really noisy, as you can see. And this is the second one with a value of 7. You can clearly see the difference. And now for the SSS, let's open it. Clearly we don't see anything since this AOV is empty. Under the IBR, let's change the transmission in direct. Under inactive, let's go to the SSS direct. SSS direct and the indirect quality is controlled by the value in the render settings. Hit Ctrl B. Let's move this to the side and increase this value here. Instead of 1, let's use a value of 10. Let's take a snapshot of this one and save it. Change the value of the SSS. Instead of 10, let's use 1 again so we can compare between the two. Let's take a snapshot by clicking here on this icon. This is when we have a value of 1 in the SSS, and this is when we have a value of 10. You can clearly see the difference in the noise. Change the SSS direct from the inactives to SSS in direct and let it render. Just remember that we have a value of 10 in the SSS in the render settings. It took 22 seconds. For now, let's decrease this value of 10 to 1 again. It only took 1 second, but the noise is really visible. You can clearly see it. And now let's move on to the last one, the volume. Open it up. There's nothing in this ALV. Let's change it under inactive. Let's choose the volume. To improve the quality of your fog, you need to increase the volume samples under any light you have in your scene. Since we have only this spotlight here, let's increase this to around 20 and let it render, and then I'll show you the result. After increasing the volume samples to 20, this render took 5 minutes and 10 seconds. But you can clearly see the difference between the first one when we had a value of 2 for the volume samples and this one where we have 20 samples. Lastly, we have the camera samples, and this is, as I said before, it's a multiplier over all the other values. So whenever we increase it, we increase the quality of the image, but it comes with the cost of increasing the render time. To see its effect, let's hide our volume, head back to the diffuse, open it up, and in the IBR, instead of volume, let's use the beauty. I'll render this one with the camera sample of 1, and then I'll gradually increase the camera samples, and after I finish rendering them all, I'll show them to you. I finished this one with a value of 1. Let's take a snapshot. Let's increase the camera samples. Instead of 1, let's use 3. And this is the final image after we increased the camera samples to 3. It took around 3 minutes. Let's take a snapshot and then increase the value again. Instead of 3, let's use 5 and let it render to the end. And after that, let's compare the 3 renders. This one took around 8 minutes. Let's take a snapshot and then I'll compare the 3 images. This is the first one when we had a value of 1. You can see that we still have a lot of noise in the shadows and around the objects that we have in the scene. This is the second one when we had a value of 3. It's much cleaner, we can barely see any noise in the image. And the last one when we had a value of 5, you can see any kind of a huge difference between the value of 3 and the value of 5, since after the value of 3 to 4, the changes in the image quality become subtle, so you don't need to go beyond 4. And that would be it for today's video. See you next time.